Hi everyone, thanks for joining me on this sort of trip down memory lane. I'm going to talk about some SEGA Saturn games that I've mentioned like 1,000 times before. Nothing here that I'm going to show you is pretty much new. It's just part of the collection that I have, and what I want to talk about today was just about sort of being at the right place at the right time and not knowing. And I'm sure you guys have some stories like this. For me, the SEGA Saturn is sort of like my go-to console when it comes to talking about sort of being in the right place at the right time, because back then when this came out, which was 95, 96, 97, and a little bit into 1998, that was when the console was relevant, nobody had a SEGA Saturn. I was like the only guy. I was a rebel without a cause. And so I just picked a couple of games. Again, it's the ones that I usually always go to just talk about, you know, where I was when these games came out, what was released around that time, and why I'm really, really thankful to have these games now, because some of them at least are really, really rare. So again, I'm just picking. So I just grabbed a handful. So one of the ones is this Tomb Raider. For those that don't know, Tomb Raider was actually supposed to be a SEGA Saturn exclusive. Not many people know that. This was originally developed for the Saturn, and I mean, it became really apparent early on that they were going to have to port this over to the PlayStation, primarily because, well, the Saturn wasn't selling that hot. And so, you know, I forget how you pronounce them, Eidos, I think it was Crystal Dynamics, right? It was Core back then, that's right. Core Design. They originally wanted this to be a Saturn exclusive, but because the Saturn just wasn't selling as well as the PlayStation at this point in time, they ported it over. But obviously it took more time than that. Their bosses basically were saying, look guys, the Saturn just doesn't have the greatest sales right now, so we got to do something. And so they were told that they had to port this over to PlayStation. And it's funny because today this series is like synonymous with the PlayStation brand, and not many people realize or know that it actually started out on the Saturn and was kind of a flop on the Saturn, which a lot of people don't know either. And it's funny because a lot of the blame for that isn't on the company, but actually on Sega. Sega did not market this as some big exclusive, and they actually had it first. It wasn't for a long time, but they did have it first on the Sega Saturn, and you would never know that back then. It was just like in EGM and magazines like that where you knew that this game was coming out, and I think that was a huge mistake, a huge blunder on Sega's part. But I remember back then purchasing this game, this very copy, and I was like, wow, you know, all my PlayStation friends at the time, they were like, wow, that looks so cool and whatever, but they knew that it was going to hit their system. And I just remember just going, wow, like, Sega, how stupid can you possibly be? Why the hell didn't you market this? And then it's so funny because then that's exactly what Sony did. Sony would market the living crap out of this, and it became this huge phenomenon. And I always thought that was funny because really this was a Saturn franchise, and ironically enough, Tomb Raider would not touch a Sega platform again until the Dreamcast many years later, and sort of the whole series bypassed the Saturn completely. I'm not going to do this for everything, but just a little bit. Where is what I wanted to talk about next? I remember this being a huge, big deal. This is Nights into Dreams. The original one I purchased came with the 3D controller. I then purchased this particular long box version. I believe it was a couple years later. I'm trying to remember what it looked like, because I think the original bundle didn't have this. It came in a box with just the 3D controller and then a jewel case type thing. But I could be mistaken. It's been so many years. But I remember everyone at the time when this was coming out, everybody was talking about Crash, and everybody was talking about Super Mario 64, and I was too. I was really enjoying. I can't remember which one I had first, if I had this first or Mario 64, I don't know. But I just remember at that point in time when all three of those games were coming out, when you had Super Mario 64, you had Crash Bandicoot, and you had Nights into Dreams, everybody focused on those other two games. And it was so funny that to the general mainstream audience today who remember back, everyone's like, oh yeah, you bought a Saturn for Knights, you bought a Saturn for Knights, you bought a Saturn for Knights. But truth be told, back then when this came out, this was so overshadowed by all the other, well, all the others, by the other two franchises that almost everybody ignored this. Yeah, it sold well, and I think it was actually one of the highest selling games on the system, coupled with Virtua Fighter 2. But the truth be told, it really did get overshadowed. And it's funny how history and people's memories sort of change as time goes on. Because today, people look back and are like, oh yeah, Knights, everybody knows Knights, 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 Knights. I swear to you, at least locally, I used to be able to go into any game store and you'd find copies of this, and no one was talking about it. It was like no big deal for so many people, because the Saturn was so ignored because of the blunders that Sega had made when it first launched and everything else. But it's funny because now this has come to define the Sega Saturn, and I find that kind of ironic, because back then, it's not that people didn't give a crap or anything like that, it's just that the sales weren't there. This may have sold, what, 2 million units, if that, and like Mario 64 selling 7, 8 million, Crash Bandicoot going on, you know, selling millions and millions of units. So, and I'm lying, with Mario, who knows, maybe 20 million for all I know. But yeah, it's just funny how this sort of has taken over all of the North American sort of Saturn market now. Everybody goes, oh, Knights, Knights, Knights. It's a phenomenal game, and I really had a great time with it. But it's funny how history now remembers this being way more popular than it actually was. And speaking of Sonic Team, their follow-up to Knights, which was Burning Rangers, this was one of the ones I recall from 1998. I have no idea when it came out in 98, but when I think of 1998, I always think of Metal Gear Solid and Ocarina of Time, because that's what everybody was talking about. Everybody was talking about those games. And I remember going and picking this up at my local game store, and I had to order this. And it's the same, you'll see, I'll say it for a few other games. This cost me $99 back in 1998. Everybody thought I was crazy for purchasing this, but no one was carrying Sega Saturn stuff at that point in time. By the end of 1997, it was done. It was finished. The Saturn was dead in the water. Like, you couldn't even find the system anywhere, let alone games. And so I had to, like most other people, had to order these games through your local game shops. You couldn't go into a Toys R Us, at least not here, and find games like this. They weren't carrying them anymore. So this was a great game, by the way. I've done a review of this. I did a review of Knights. I haven't done Tomb Raider yet. I'll have to tackle that one day. This is actually one of the most requested reviews I've had to redo with the XRGB Mini and my RGB out. So maybe one day I'll get to tackling this in better quality for you guys, just to show you what it's really like. It's an amazing game, really fun. Holds up okay. Some of the camera angles are a little bit off. This is my original Panzer Dragoon. This was actually in the box that I got. I got a Panzer Dragoon launch model thingy-mabob. I think it was actually an exclusive to Canada, if I'm not mistaken. I had a couple people write in to me when I showed my box of the Sega Saturn. They were like, "Oh, cool! That was never released, you know, here or there or whatever." I don't know. I saw it, I bought it. End of story. Panzer Dragoon. This is a fantastic game. I've been over this. I reviewed the whole series. It's another one that I've had a lot of requests to go back to with the newer technology that I got available now. It's funny because I remember this and I loved this. I thought this was a fantastic launch title. And it's so funny because today everybody remembers Daytona and everybody remembers the botched up port of Virtua Fighter, but nobody talks about Panzer Dragoon. They talk about the series as a whole, but this was actually a really good launch title. This was pretty damn sweet, and it was by far the best launch title of the blundered Sega Saturn launch, but it was the follow-ups, the two follow-ups that I adored, which were Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei, I think is how it's pronounced. It's German for two. This one I really liked. This is my favorite game probably in the shooter series. And then again, another one from 1998, which was Panzer Dragoon Saga. This is the Holy Grail. This is, like, people don't even play this game. They wrap it in plastic and all this kind of crap. For me, I bought this when it was new. I don't care what it's worth today. It doesn't matter to me. I bought it to play, and I actually go back to this one and play it every now and then. This is the one that everybody's requested too. I think I've had, like, my goodness, probably hundreds of people request to see this remastered with the upscaler I have now and RGB out and all that jazz. And I would like to do that, actually. I would really like to do that for this series because it's my favorite Sega Saturn series. It's a really good game, holds up really well, really unique battle system. And if you haven't checked out my reviews for any of these, I highly recommend you go and do that. And I know I'm plugging myself, but hey, that's life. One of my favorite games on the Saturn is this bad boy right here, Shining the Holy Ark. And I can't remember if this is from '98. I'm looking at the back. It says 96. Really? I thought it was a 97 game. But anyways, this is a phenomenal game. Feels like the true follow-up to Shining, what is it? Shining in the Darkness, I think it's called, on the Genesis. It's a Camelot RPG. Fantastic. If you like Golden Sun, highly recommend you check this out. I remember when this came out, I was really shocked at the sheer quality of this, because it used like the best of 3D and 2D, and it was so unlike anything else on the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation at its time. It looked gorgeous. It's the same thing with like Panzer Dragoon Saga. Yeah, this game, nobody knew about this in 1998. Nobody cared. Nobody like gave a damn. But I remember being more impressed by this than almost every other RPG I had played on the PlayStation at that point in time, including Final Fantasy VII, I might add, because it was so unique, the combat system, that it was different. Anyways, to wrap up with Shining the Holy Ark, I still stand by the fact that if you are going to pick up a Sega Saturn, buy this game. This, in my opinion, is one of the best, if not the best, game on the Sega Saturn. It's beautiful. It's got an incredible soundtrack, and it features stellar gameplay. And the last one I want to talk about, again, nothing new here, if you guys know me, is Shining Force 3. This was one of the first games I covered using not the XRGB Mini, but using my RGB SCART upscaler. Now I've learned how to use the XRGB Mini, which is a vastly superior upscaler to the one I was using when I did this video, but hey, it's still pretty good quality to show you guys. This is a fantastic strategy RPG. If you like games like Fire Emblem, I highly recommend you check out the Shining Force series. It's brilliant. Sadly, this was the last one to be released by Camelot, and what's really unfortunate is that we never got the other scenarios. There were 2 additional scenarios plus a premium disc that were released exclusively in Japan. There is a translation, a fan translation that is out there, which I want to cover, believe it or not. You need a modded Sega Saturn or an emulator to play it, and I don't want to do the emulator route. I want to go the official Sega Saturn route. But I remember when this one came out, this was another one, I believe, from '98. Yeah, it says 1998 on this one. So this was just like the other 2 I mentioned, alongside I can't even think what it's called, House of the Dead and Ray Earth. Those ones, they were all the last sort of batch. I have those 2, they're actually in a box beside me. But I just wanted to focus on some of these. I figured that was good enough, and just talk about some of the memories I have associated with these games, talk a little bit about the games. I've reviewed all of them, like I said, but it's funny, I've seen more, lately I've been seeing a lot more videos on YouTube talking about the Saturn, and it's funny, as someone who actually lived through it and owned the Saturn and was a big fan of it back when all of these games were relevant, I like the fact that I'm seeing a lot more videos now about the system, and I think it's starting to be appreciated a lot more now than it was back when it was originally released, and it's a real shame that people weren't into the system back then, because it was a 2D powerhouse and it clearly was capable of doing 3D based on games like this. And it's just a real shame that it never succeeded. Anyways, guys, do you have any stories like that where you had, I don't know, you were into a system that wasn't really too popular necessarily, but it got popular later on? Or maybe just some memories of games that were popular, and what do you remember about them when they came out, things like that. By all means, leave a comment below, and I hope you enjoyed this little vlog. We got some pretty cool content coming up for you guys in the next week or 2, but come back on Friday for our podcast. Stephen and I have a very special announcement to make for you guys that I think you're really going to like, especially if you like retro content. Alright, thanks for watching everybody. I'll be back soon with another video. Take care.